welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael. And as you can see from my background, I am back at my home base of doing shows. So I am glad to be back. And thank you to everyone who continues to watch and support the show and all the experiments we do. And with that being said, before I introduce my guest, I want to take a moment and recognize my guest as being a veteran, and I want to thank him for his service and the sacrifice that he made. That is something I feel is truly notable and worth mentioning, and it's something that's important to my heart because my father was a veteran as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And with that being said, I am going to allow my guest to introduce himself because he has such a large background that I just don't feel like I could justly say everything correctly and get everything in correct order. So I'm going to turn it over to the one, the only, amazing, insightful Keith Evans.
I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on your show. Every time I give myself an introduction, I always leave something out, and it's very hard to do an introduction, and you always feel like you need to include everything, and it's next to impossible. But I'll say this much: I've been interested in understanding, trying to understand the paranormal since I was 4 years old. And I learned very quickly you don't share that with your parents because they kind of go off their rocker. And anyway, I didn't really get into using equipment until about 2011, 2012. Prior to that, my paranormal research was just very primitive, just me. And I hardly ever I never did paranormal research with another person. It was just me by myself. If I talked to friends about going, they would remind me that my parents thought I was crazy for doing paranormal research and maybe I should try to do something else. So I'd never had a friend that wanted to do paranormal research with me. So most of my paranormal research was done and not even talked about. I usually didn't take pictures, definitely no videos. I didn't start doing that until I was close to retirement. And you might say I was 4 years old in 1962, and I didn't do my first paranormal video where I documented everything with equipment like the millimeter and the Obelisk 5. Well, back then it was the Obelisk 4. That was like 2011 or 2012. So I think if my community that I grew up in, which was very conservative there in uh, central Maryland, I think if I'd have grew up in a community that was more welcoming to the paranormal, I might have really got into the field openly a long time prior before I did. But I think anyone that's interested in paranormal has to be careful because if you're in any type of law enforcement or if you're in any type of business where you need a security clearance, that could hurt your chances of getting a security clearance if they think that you're unreliable because they think you're seeing or hearing ghosts. So I'm sure there's a lot more people that are interested in the paranormal and might even have certain gifts where they can sense the emotions of people who have passed away, like an empath. That's what I have. And, but they just have to stay quiet because can you imagine if you were a law enforcement officer testifying against a criminal and then they bring up, and also he hears and sees ghosts? They would try to ruin your credibility with it. So you have to be very careful today when you're involved in the paranormal. and who you're talking to and who you're dealing with. So, but I've since 2018, I've written two books. My first book that I wrote was A Hayes House Ghost or People Too. And to me, it was a heartwarming book about two families that really fell in love with a Victorian home. The one family built it in 1908, the Bucks, and they were there until the head of the house, Jeff Buck, passed away in 1922. And then the next family that lived there for a long period of time was the Hayes family, and they bought the Hayes house in 1942. And the last Hayes family member moved out and sold the house in 1996. So I think both families loved the house and they cared enough about it to protect it after they'd passed away. And to me, that's just, it's nice to know that whatever you care about in life, you're still going to care about it once you pass away. And I know a lot of people are preoccupied with being afraid of the unknown or afraid of ghosts and spirits, but I think they're wasting their time with fear. And the only thing they really have to fear is fear itself. Because once you start to understand the paranormal, it's more interesting and intriguing than it is scary. Now, my second book, Vampires Dead or Alive, was released in October of 2024. And that book is a lifetime, almost a lifetime of me thinking about vampires. And what brought me to think about vampires was the fact that there was a TV program. It was a British sitcom called Dark Shadows. And the main character was Barnabas Collins, who was a vampire. And he was a vampire with feelings, emotions. He cared. He worried about people. He wanted the best for people. He didn't want to bite anybody, but he was a vampire, and that was his existence that he was dealing with. And I really thought that brought out a different view than what most people had always thought of a vampire as being a bloodthirsty killer that's going to get you when you're asleep at night. I really felt that the British sitcom did really made honest work towards helping people to understand vampires. And I really feel that uh, vampires have been given a raw deal over the years. But anyway, getting back to my main point, after watching this British sitcom called Dark Shadows for like 3 or 4 years, and really my hero at the time was Barnabas Collins. I just thought he was the greatest. It made me think about, how do vampires have all these abilities? How do they have all these powers that a normal human being doesn't have? Like, how can they dematerialize? How can they shapeshift? How can they look at a mirror but not have a reflection? And all this made me think over the years. And I didn't get my degree in chemistry until I was 50 years old. And during the process of getting that degree, I was able to take some courses like genetics and quantum mechanics and physics. So it helped me with every course I was taken or had taken at the University of Central Florida in near Orlando, Florida. That helped me to actually add to my um, describing how vampires can do what they do. And that's what the book actually is about. Each chapter is a certain characteristic that a vampire has the ability to do, like, say, shapeshift. And I look at, is a vampire more dead or alive? Because they're called the living dead. So, how can you be dead and be alive? And I looked at each trait, for instance, like shapeshifting. I don't know any living person that can shapeshift other than a skinwalker, and it's kind of debatable on whether they're living or dead. So anyway, I start out in each chapter by identifying, are they more like a living person or more like a dead person? And I don't know of too many dead people that can shapeshift unless you look at their body deteriorating over a period of time. And then I go into uh, my theoretical science explanation, scientific explanation on how they can shape shift. For instance, I feel like shape shifting probably involves the vampire's ability to bend space and time. Now, to bend space and time, you need a lot of energy, whether you're magnifying the ley lines of the earth, the natural energy of the earth, or whether you have some type of small black hole in your pocket that just bends space and time for just the vampire so that the vampire can go back into time. I feel that we've been reincarnated many times over, and that's how a vampire shapeshifts. They go back in time to where they were, say, a bat or a werewolf, and that period of time they become a werewolf because that they go back in time. So you're actually seeing them back at the time where they're sold. Their electromagnetic energy is all we are after we pass away until we are reincarnated back into a biological body. Are sold when we're in a body of a, um, say, werewolf, whether it was a couple hundred years ago. That's what you're seeing. And the person who's seeing the shape shifting, they're not going back in time. So somehow the vampire has the ability or the technology to only bend space and time locally for their own physical body, but no other part of the room is going back in time with them, or no one who's watching them is actually going back in time. But you get to see the vampire uh, as they shapeshift, they're actually bending space and time to go back to when they were whatever they want to shapeshift into. So that's how the book goes. And it's not a very long book, it's a little less than 50 pages. So it's available on Amazon as a paperback for about $10, ebook on Kindle for about $2.99. But the book has no fluff. It's just all information that most people find brand new. For the people who have read the book, they just said the book blew their mind. They said they would have never have thought of any of the stuff that I had thought of as far as how a vampire do what they do. And most people say that it actually led them to want to do more research onto vampires and, just to see, you know, I do a whole chapter on genetics, more or less, as far as mutations of a vampire. And I talk about how the different research scientists have looked at the difference in the genome, the genes of a fruit bat versus a vampire bat. And they found that most vampire bats are just missing certain amino acids from their DNA and RNA, and that accounts for their ability to, drink blood and not taste that horrible iron flavor that most people taste when they have, you know, when they're around a lot of blood. I was an Army medic and a Maryland EMT for years, and when there's a lot of blood on a accident scene, I can taste the iron in my mouth and I don't have any blood in my mouth, but you can actually smell, to me, blood smells like iron, you know. So, anyway, the bats have also the ability, since they're drinking vampire bats, they have the ability for their stomach to, their digestive system to remove that amount of iron, and it comes out in their bat droppings. That's the reason why bat droppings are so good for fertilizer, because their iron rich food supply, which is blood, they have to remove that. Otherwise, it would probably kill them if they don't remove it from their you know body. So, are there any live questions or anything from people? I keep seeing stuff pop up, but I can't read it because my eyes aren't that good.
Well, there's the chat room's pretty quiet right now, but I do have a couple of questions from for you that I was hoping to ask, and one is, as a paranormal investigator and your research into vampires, do you feel like your background as a forensic scientist kind of guided you and opened your eyes more to what was going on than, say, someone who has no science background?
I think so because even getting my degree in chemistry and doing research as a chemist, um, that prepared me for being a forensic scientist. You go in with an open mind. You don't have any preconditioned, outcome. A lot of people look at a person and say, well, that guy's bad, so I'm going to look for something to prove he's bad. And as a scientist, I mainly look at the evidence. What does the evidence point towards? And the evidence is like something physical. So, I try when I do paranormal research to get photographs, whether it's thermal imaging or a regular photograph or some type of infrared type photography. And I try to get a piece of equipment to support, what I think or feel. And then if that piece of equipment can give me an intelligent response, then that helps me to make my decision when I analyze the data from my paranormal research. So I try to go into it, with an open mind. And I can only say throughout my paranormal research from 1964 up until, today, 2025, I've only had one situation where I may have, and I say may have, uh, come in contact with a possible vampire. I think ghosts and spirits are have the ability, just like vampires, to send messages right directly to your brain, and that message could be as a like a video. So you hear them, you see them, and you actually think they're in the room, but they're not in the room. Um, Telepathic. I think telepathic is the term. And I had one situation like that when I was doing paranormal research in St. Augustine, Florida in 2020. And I went there right before COVID hit hard, and there was like only a 1 week shutdown in St. Augustine. And during that 1 week, the paranormal research was just off the walls. It was almost like the ghosts and spirits knew something was going on. But anyway, while I was there at the 1880 Victorian in St. Augustine, and that's a three-story Victorian style townhouse that was built in 1883. And the owners at the time that I did the paranormal research, they called it the 1880 Victorian. So that's what I call it also. Um, I saw a young lady that no one else could see. And I know I'm not delusional because usually if you see something and you're having some type of delusional problem, it's usually negative. So, and this young lady was friendly, she was attractive, she had very pale skin, which in Florida, most people, white people, don't stay pale very long. They either turn red or brown. So she was unusual in that way. And she was unusual that she laughed a lot. She just thought it was so funny that I could see her and no one else could see her. But she was polite in that she didn't give me away. She didn't say anything to me when she was around other people. And I at first I thought she was either a friend or a family member of the owner. I thought it was the owner's daughter because he told me he had a daughter. And I was at the 1880 for about 2 months doing paranormal research. And during that 2 month period, the owner came down to visit uh, on three separate weekends. Um, so the first time he came down, I thought the young lady was, his daughter, and I didn't really ask too many questions. I looked at his daughter. He never introduced her, and I thought, well, that's strange. He introduced his sister, his wife, himself, but didn't introduce his daughter. So I looked at her and I said, "Are you still in school?" Because I figured she's either high school or college age. And she didn't answer me. She just smiled and giggled. And he answered me like he thought I was talking to him, and I wasn't. So he had invited me to sit down in they only had four rocking chairs on the front porch at that time. And he invited me to sit down, but the young lady would have to get up and move. So I didn't want to sit down if I was going to be taking the seat away from her. And I thought that was strange. And he even told me later on, he said, "Well, I remember you got a funny look on your face when I asked you to sit down." And he wondered, he couldn't figure out why I did that. And he found out later on that I could see this young lady, but he could not. And no one in his family could see the young lady either. So she kind of had. Do you remember Shirley Temple when she done the tap dancing up the stairs backwards? She had those
Right.
big kind of curls in her hair. Well, that's the type of curls this young lady had. And this young lady had either black or dark brown hair. So I haven't seen those type of curls worn by a young lady much since maybe the early 60s. So that might be the time period that this young lady was from. And I don't, excuse me, I'm not saying that she was a vampire because I think ghosts and spirits have the ability to actually send the message also straight to your brain so you see it, you hear it, but no one else can. And you don't know that if you're the being a if you're receiving a direct message from someone who has the ability to telepathically send it to you, you don't know at that point in time that you're actually seeing something that no one else can see. Now, it could be such a thing that there was some type of time warp so that this young lady, she said her father owned the place, and maybe back in the early 60s, maybe her father did own the place. I don't remember her ever giving me her father's name, but maybe it was some type of time warp so that only her and I were involved in it. And I was seeing her within the 1960s. And I don't know what she was actually seeing other than me. But by seeing me, she was seeing me in the 2020s or the year 2020. So that might be another explanation for the reason why I was able to see this young lady and nobody else was. Um, I also thought that she looked like a ghost or a spirit that I had had a dream about, who I had visited this ghost and spirit's house in Apalachicola, Florida. And I asked her, I said, "Is your name Margaret?" And she said, "How did you know my name?" So, and the ghost or spirit from Apalachicola would be Margaret Key, and she's got a very beautiful house. Her and her husband did not build the house; they moved in to the house. It was already built, but she lived there until her death around 1996. But I had actually went to her house to try to see what it looked like on the inside. At that time, I did not say anything to the owner about being a paranormal researcher because sometimes that's the quickest way not to be able to get in to see the house. So I just told him that I just wanted to see the beautiful house. At the time, the guy let me in. I didn't even know if he was the owner. He was outside doing lawn work with a group of other guys. And then as I left, I thanked him for letting me see the first floor of the house. And I said something like, "Well, I hope the owner doesn't mind." And he said, "Oh, that's okay. I'm the owner." So that was probably at that point in time, I was living in Houston, Texas, and I was working for the Laboratory of Scientific Services. Um, and I would fly to Apalachicola, Florida, when I was had a like a 3 day or 4 day weekend, and so that weekend I had flown there, and I was actually on my way back to the airport when I stopped by the house and was able to see the house that Margaret Key lived in, and it was very original floors, original horizontal, or floor horizontal wall boards, and original tug and groove type ceiling boards too. All of it was original, but I only was able to see the first floor. So anyway, when I went back to get into my car, it was a rental car, and I had it for the whole weekend, and I never had any problems with the seatbelt needs fastening light come on. But at that point in time, I knew a ghost or spirit was sitting in the passenger seat because the seatbelt need fastening sign came on. So I don't know if that point in time I fastened the seatbelt or not. I don't think I did, but I just said out loud. I figured it was Margaret Key, and I said, Margaret, I'm getting ready to go to the airport. I'd already pulled out and was on the road on Highway 98 heading back to the airport in Panama City or near Panama City. And I told the ghost of Margaret Key that I'm about 5 miles out of Apalachicola, west of Apalachicola. If you don't go back home now, you'd have to go to Texas with me. And then at that point in time, the alarm that said seatbelt need fastening went off, and I knew she'd went back to her house. But the next weekend, I didn't go out of town. I stayed in Houston, and I had a strange dream. And in the dream, I saw a elderly woman. Well, actually, I heard crying. I was on the second floor of a old house. I think I was there pretending to be a buyer just so I could see the old house, which is sometimes the only way a paranormal researcher can get into an old house. And I had heard somebody crying, and I walked out of the room. And the if I was there with a realtor agent, they didn't follow me. And when I walked out, I saw this elderly woman walking up the steps. And when she got to the top of the steps, I asked her, "What is wrong?" And she turned her back to me and was looking into a mirror. And I could see her face very clearly in the mirror. And I just put my arms around her and hugged her. And then she just said, "I must not." And then the dream ended. And then I thought, after that, I was looking for a picture of what Margaret Key looked like because I thought, I think that was Margaret Key at probably age prior to her passing away, since it was a frail woman, about the same height as this young lady that I saw at the 1880 Victorian in 2020. And she had, of course, this woman I saw in, I guess it was around 2012. She had just white or gray hair. So when I did see a picture of Margaret Key, she used to write for magazines uh, back in the 50s and 60s and maybe even the 70s. When I saw her picture, the facial features were the same as this lady that I saw in my dream around 2012 or 2013 when I was living in Houston. And the facial features were similar to the young lady I saw at the 1880 Victorian in 2020 that no one else could see. So my guess that her name was Margaret, you know, probably it was the ghost or spirit of Margaret Key. Now, at the age that I saw her, it might have been before her last name was Key, and I don't know what her maiden name was. So I should do some research and find out what Margaret Key's maiden name is. And I would like to go back sometime late spring or early summer to the 1880 Victorian if the same person owns it and do some more paranormal research and try to get a book out just about the 1880 Victorian. But if I do see that young lady again, I'd like to know what Margaret Key's maiden name was so I can ask her. And if I have a first and a last name and she says yes, then I know who the ghost of spirit is. So that was just, it was humbling because as a paranormal researcher, I'd never had anything like that happen before. And I felt humbled because I thought I know everything about ghosts and spirits. I don't. And if I can be fooled by a ghost of spirit appearing in front of me, and I think they're as real as you and I, how many people out there who aren't in the paranormal research have seen ghosts of spirits and just don't know that they weren't a flesh and blood person? So,
Right.
anyway, did you have another question for me? I saw something else pop up.
I do have a question for you, and I'm curious. It ties into the ghosts and the vampire side. Is you talk about how like only you were able to see the spirit and not the family that's there now, and I'm wondering if someone is more open, like has an ability to see spirits, or their mind is more open than, say, the average person who just is going about their day. Do you feel like that's who the spirits or the vampires are going to, say, project their image to and react with? Or do you feel like it was just luck of the draw that you were able to see them and interact with them?
Well, it could be a combination of both. I know that, for instance, I'm a paranormal researcher, and I I did book signings for my first book, The Hayes House Ghost or People too, and I didn't enjoy talking to people who automatically connected me with Satan because I was a paranormal researcher. So I think ghosts and spirits are the same way. A ghost of spirit probably don't want to communicate with you in whatever way it is, whether it's using telepathic means or what other means, but they probably would rather communicate with someone who believes that they exist. I mean, communicating with someone who don't think they exist would probably not even talk to them, or they would become very frightened. So I think there's something to that. It's just like who we choose to be friends with. We choose to be friends with something that people that we have something in common with, something that we share the same goals. And if that goal is to research paranormal ghosts and spirits or vampires, then that's something we have in common. And, if you're a ghost or spirit, you probably want to communicate more with a paranormal researcher because at least they believe that you exist. And I think most ghosts and spirits are self aware, so they do know that they exist. And it probably really breaks their heart when they run across people that say, "Oh, no, you're not real. You're not existing. You're not communicating with me now." I mean, think about how you would feel if you were walking down the streets and you said hello to somebody and they just crossed the street to get away from you. Wouldn't make you feel good. So I think ghost
Mhm.
spirits are going to communicate with people who are understanding that they are in our existence, and I think they feel more comfortable communicating with someone who accepts that there are ghosts and spirits in the world. Now, whether
It's interesting you say that
you know,
because yeah, I will tell people, the reason you may not get anything is one, the spirits don't know you. If this is your first time, so they don't know. But secondly, is if they can feel intention, and if your intention is to be there for 15 seconds of fame, they're not going to waste their time. If you're there
right?
to genuinely talk and do the research and investigate, they're going to interact with you. So it's interesting how we had the same theory about that.
And I think ghosts and spirits do like the relationship. They don't just want you to show up one time to their house and never show up again. And I think they'll communicate with you if you can do an extended period of paranormal research. For instance, when I did my research for the Hayes House Ghoster People 2, I had at least from November of 2017 until shortly prior to the book being released, uh, to spend as much time at the Hayes House as I wanted to. The owner actually gave me a key. She just asked me to keep a very low profile because she rented out rooms through Airbnb, and she didn't want to upset any of the guests because some people are terribly afraid of ghosts and spirits. So if I'm doing paranormal research, then that person who's going to be afraid is going to be really put on alert. So I was very cautious as to trying to do paranormal research. I actually caught people who were staying in the Airbnb trying to like do surveillance on me. They would like look, and I would like always have my cell phone nearby, like I was talking on the cell phone, so they wouldn't think I was talking to ghosts and spirits. So anyway, I when I did paranormal research at the Hayes House, it was unique because there was always something going on at the Hayes House. At the time I was there doing paranormal research, there was um, a lady who lived on the third floor apartment, and she was coming in and out. And there were three or four rooms that were rented out as Airbnb. There was one room that was rented out just for artists to come to have a quiet place to paint and not have any interruptions from their home or whatever. So there was always something going on. And I could imagine probably some of it was paranormal and some of it was just people coming in and out. And there was a front door and the back door, and some people used the back door and some people used the front door. So while I was doing paranormal research, I wish I could have done paranormal research and been the only one in the house. that way would have ruled out, well, I won't look and see if that's paranormal because I heard someone run up the steps. But one time when I was at the Hayes house, I was doing paranormal research in the uh, what they call the living room at the Hayes house. And I thought I knew the owner was in town. He came in, he usually parked around back. So he would come in the back door and run up the back stairs. They had like these little narrow stairs that went from the first floor up to the attic. And then the front stairway only went up to the second floor and was very wide. So later on, I asked him, I said, did you come in about an hour ago and run up the stairs? And he said, no, I haven't been back since I left earlier. So I don't know who it was that came in the back door and ran up the steps, but I assumed it was him. So a lot of times, residual energy is just something that's not an intelligent ghost. It's something that's played back in the house, and you won't catch it if you think that there's a actual living being causing it to happen. But I actually was able to live at the Hayes house for a short period of time before they sold the Hayes house. And it was after Hurricane Michael that hit the Florida Panhandle in October 2018. And the place I was living in was destroyed. So as soon as I was able to get out of the uh, shelter that I was in and get a rental car, I drove to Apalachicola to see if the Hayes house was okay. And at that time, uh, the owners lived in Georgia, so the only one that was at the Hayes house was the lady who was cleaning the rooms. And I'd went in and of course, I told her that my place had been destroyed by Hurricane Michael, and I was just looking for a place to rent. And she was on the phone with the owner at the time, and the owner heard what I said, and he said, "Well," he asked the cleaning lady to see if I wanted to rent the third floor apartment, which I did. So I stayed at the third floor apartment from like the end of October, about the 26th or 27th of October, until they sold the place about, it was either the 1st of March or the 1st of April, um, 2019. Now, while I was there, I only had the mail meter and the uh, thermal imager, which was a flare thermal imager. Um, so that's the only two pieces of equipment I had to use. And I especially enjoyed the residual energy that took place in the house. I had talked to many people who said that they had uh, rented their short periods of time in the past, and they said they knew that there was ghosts and spirits there. But you could hear people running up the steps. And I was on the third floor apartment, which up until after Kathleen Hayes left there in 1996, it had been an unfinished attic. So it was only sometime after 1996 that someone built an apartment up on the third floor. And that's where I was. And I could hear at night, it was usually sometime between, I would usually go to bed around 11 p.m. And between 11 p.m. and 1 p.m., you could hear someone running up, not the whole steps, but some of the steps. You could hear like clump, clump, and then the landing, and then clump, clump, clump up to the top. The front stairwell was kind of funny. It had two landings before you got to the second floor. So what I heard was like residual energy, and it was always like the two steps before you got to the second landing, and then three steps until you were on the second floor, and it would just repeat itself. And there was no one in the house. At that time, there was a gentleman living on the second floor apartment with his daughter, and I would always ask him. I said, "Did anyone come in around 1 o'clock that you know of last night?" And he said no. And a lot of times he wouldn't even hear what I heard. So I don't know whether he was just dead asleep and it didn't wake him or what. Um, and also in my third floor apartment, I would hear somebody running up the steps from the second floor to the third floor. And I would jump up in bed and there'd be no one at the top of the steps. And I would get out of bed immediately and look, no one on the steps whatsoever. But they would just sound like someone like was in a mad rush, clumping, clumping, clumping. So they went up the steps. And also, one that happened maybe 3 or 4 times. Somebody running up the steps. Now, the house was Airbnb, and there was a lot of people wanting to check out the house from off the street. And if the Airbnb people didn't lock the door, you could have somebody wander through the house just checking it out. So I always wondered, well, if I didn't lock the door, that my door to my apartment was down on the second floor level at the bottom of the steps. And I always wondered if I would forget to lock that door, somebody just might want to see what the attic looks like. And it could be them running up the attic. So, but that was never the case. I was always very vigilant at locking the door. And one time I woke up, I guess it was around shortly after I had went to sleep, and I woke up and was still hearing a sound. It sounded like someone running from the northeast side of the apartment across in front of my bed to the southeast side of the apartment. And I got up out of bed, and the apartment was had wall to wall carpeting, and I'm over 200 pounds. I tried to stomp with my feet, couldn't make a stomping sound. The rug had too much cushion. So whatever it was, it had to be something from a bygone era when it was a hardwood floor. And when the Hayes house was built, the upstairs had never been finished off. I made sure that I asked the daughter of the Pat and Kathleen Hayes. Their daughter, I think, is still alive and was alive when I wrote the book. And I was able to talk to her at at on many different occasions for long periods of time. And I'd asked her, was the attic ever have a hardwood floor on it? And she said no. When her parents bought it, it was just an unfinished attic. And she said you could actually fall through. And I think she said on one occasion her father slipped when he was walking on the beams and his foot did go through. And she said they had to repair the ceiling. So now, prior to the Hayes house being built in 1908, there was a fire that burnt most of the wooden buildings in Apalachicola. And that fire was started by someone who was milking a cow. And I think they were milking a cow either early morning or late evening. And they had a lantern. And something happened. The cow kicked the lantern and it started a fire that pretty much burnt a lot of the wooden houses. Apparently, the wind was blowing towards the northeast and it took the flames that way. So the house that actually may have stood there where the Hayes house was built in 1908 probably burnt down in that 1900 fire. So that house or building might have been 3 stories. It might have had hardwood floors on each floor. So that
Mm-mm.
residual energy might have been coming from the house that was there before 1908 and not coming from anyone that lived at the Hayes house.
And it's interesting when you think about history and everything. I might be off in the timeline, but when you say like a lady was milking the cow and caused a fire, my first thought that popped in my head was the same thing happened in Chicago. A
Yeah.
cow, a barn, and a cow, and the Great Fire. And so it's like, did people not read, stories, the news, or did news not travel fast? In which case, people weren't being more vigilant or more aware of their surroundings to not put the lantern in range of the cows. And
Well,
so,
apparently this fire that took place in 1900, they went with the burn patterns, and it was actually in the local newspaper. But the the cow actually was just tied in the back of the Methodist church that's still there, and the burn pattern started where that cow was tied, and went from there to the northeast. And I think that the person who was milking the cow was the first person to report that the fire was out of control. And so I think that part is probably historically sound. Um, but that's one way for me to explain how I was able to hear residual energy in a house that was built in 1908 that never had a hardwood floor on the third floor. The building or structure that existed prior to that fire taking place in 1900 may have had a third floor of a hardwood floor. So that would be residual energy from the building that had been where the Hayes house was actually built in 1908. So
right, and
a lot of people think that if the house was built, that you won't get any residual energy from whatever took place before. You could be on a piece of property where a Native American was killed back in 1357, and you might be picking up residual energy from that. So a lot of people aren't open minded enough to think back any older than, say, the house that they're actually in. But that doesn't mean that there's not residual energy that's been around since the dinosaurs, probably. And a lot of times you might pick up residual energy from 2 dinosaurs fighting and wonder what the heck's going on. I haven't yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if someone in the future picked up something like that, because residual energy is just like air soul. It can't be destroyed or created. It's there, and I think it's going to remain there. You just need someone at the right location to hear it and witness it. And you just have to understand it's not a intelligent ghost or spirit. It's just almost like the environment has encapsulated a video and an audio, or in some cases just the audio, and you're hearing it back. In most cases, I hear the audio. I very rarely see residual energy where it's visual. So I don't know whether it's just easier for the environment to record, like a tape recorder, the sounds of events that took place from the past, or whether maybe someone else has the ability to actually hear and see residual energy that's taking place.
We're approaching the hour, so I don't know if you have time to go a little bit over or.
Yeah, I have time if you want to go over.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to mention that I came across in research that might help you with, like you were explaining, the difference of the homes is in England, they keep talking about this spirit that you only see waist high walking on a street. And they said they did research and they found out that the streets in London, like in England, are one layer on top of another layer on top of another layer on top of another layer. So if you went down to the layer he was walking on, you got the full body. But because the layer he was on was, say, waist deep, you thought you were watching half a body go floating by.
Right,
And so they started to find out in England you can't judge the spirits by what you see. You have to look to see, okay, if it's a child, how many layers down is he walking
right.
versus going, okay, yeah, we have a decapitated body floating by.
That's true. That's true. That's good thinking there. Hey, I was wondering, do you mind if I share the people at home Vampires Dead or Alive, the book?
Yeah, no,
I'll
go
hold it out
ahead.
here. That's
And
the front cover.
I have a question for you about your theories in the book.
That's the back
When
cover.
when I was
Go ahead.
talking with you and we were talking about they could be, like, we were theorizing an ET race that's visiting here. And
And this
so
is the Hayes House ghost for people too. Now you were
from
saying something about a ET.
that when I talked to you on Paranormal Versus, we were discussing, could a vampire be like an alien race here on
Yes,
Earth?
I
And I
think so.
started right, and I started thinking about, I remember mentioning like a daywalker, and we were like not totally familiar with, that term or any research on that. And I started to wonder, the daywalker story is, it's an infant in the womb who they say got bit, the mother got bit, transmits the vampire disease when they called it a disease. And so the baby takes on those characteristics in the womb and is hence half vampire, half human. So it's able to, say, stand in the sunlight where a vampire can't. And I was thinking, I started wondering, well, if a vampire is an ET, has relations with the human, could that be where that offspring could be what they consider like a daywalker and have half the, like, the strength of a vampire and all those qualities, but also be able to be in the sunlight because of the other person. And that's where that legend came from. It's more like a hybrid than somebody who was infected in a womb.
Right. Well, I feel that vampires originated from another world, not on Earth. Probably a world that had their Goldilocks zone was probably connected with a star system that had a white or blue dwarf star, and that star would allow the daylight to be no lighter than our full moon nights. So that way, vampires, their whole genetics is going to be revolved around having a very light strength star. And that means that when vampires are exposed to our sun's strength, it causes their DNA to unravel. And for DNA just to fall apart like that, it's called denatured. So that's one reason why vampires have to avoid the sunlight. And well, the main and only reason they don't want to die. But I do feel that vampires originated from uh, another star system. Now, there could be vampires who arrive here, who knows, on a daily basis. But the vampires that have been here a while probably will automatically breed with the human beings that are from Earth, or at least maybe was from Mars before we came to Earth. There's factors that show that, we're the only animal that gets a sunburn, and Mars is further away from the sun. So if we were living on Mars and it had an atmosphere, we probably wouldn't get a sunburn. But that's one thing to think about, as far as we may not actually be from Earth. We might be from Mars, and their ability to have spaceships to travel from Mars to Earth, somehow that technology might have got lost in some type of cataclysm where the scientists and all died off and the books got destroyed, and could have been anything from a solar flare to a you know comet or something hitting us, which was large enough, like the comet that destroyed the dinosaurs. So we may have had the technology to travel in space far above where we're at now, and have lost that due to a tragic near distinction situation that took place on Earth maybe 4 or 5 times over since Earth cooled down and human beings were able to evolve. So,
Kind of like
but
the
I
Atlantis
I
Lemurians
really
had.
feel that definitely vampires are extraterrestrial. But if they've been here for thousands of years and they've interbreeded with humans, they probably lost most of their abilities, and they probably have definitely lost the sensitivity to the bright light. So they can probably go out in the sunlight without their DNA unraveling. Which, if you were a vampire, and you had to worry about coming in the direct sunlight, and your body starting to just go from a physical phase to a gas phase because your DNA is unraveling, you'd want to mate with humans too, so your offspring wouldn't have to worry about that.
And it makes me wonder when every once in a while we'll hear cases of like people who are unable to go outside in the sunlight, you know, and they have to stay indoors and they keep everything under shades. They don't let the sun in and everything's artificial light. If
Well,
that's a
albinos,
misdiagnostic, yeah, that
albinos are very sensitive to light, and they don't have any pigment within their skin, so they have to avoid the sunlight. But it could be the way genetics work. Maybe not everyone gets the gene pool that allows them, if they have vampires in their bloodline and in their heritage, they might not always get the genes that allow them to go out in the sunlight. And I also, before we finish, I know we only have probably a little less than a half an hour. I usually never get asked questions like this, but uh, I have like a question I would like to answer. And most people always think of vampires as being bloodthirsty killers, but think about that. If we all drank the cow's blood instead of killing the cow and eating its meat, that cow could still be living today. So if we ration the blood of an animal instead of butchering it, that animal could live. And vampires may have evolved to drink blood because on the planet that they, originated from, having a white dwarf star, maybe animals on that planet weren't able to breed and repopulate very quickly. So if you ate all the animal meat, you might then starve to death. So there had to be some reason why vampires originally evolved as being able to drink blood. Now we always think of it, well, they're bloodthirsty and I'm frightened and I'm afraid and somebody needs to, help me in some way. Well, maybe we're looking at it all wrong. Maybe we should look at it that, vampires, whatever star system they came from, if they had a white dwarf star or a blue dwarf star that only gave them enough sunlight so that it was, brightest on their moonlight night, maybe animals on that planet couldn't populate 2 or 3 times a year. And maybe that's the reason why they said, let's drink the blood instead of killing the animal and then all starving to death. Because maybe wherever planet this vampires came from, maybe that's the problem that they had. They had problem with too many vampires starving to death because there just weren't enough animals to repopulate their ability to eat them all. So maybe that's why they turned to, you know, they evolved to just being blood drinkers so they would never have to kill the animal. They could just take their time and not drink too much blood too fast. And then the animal could live a normal life and not have to be slaughtered. So there's positive ways you can look at vampires. And that's the way I look at vampires. I mean, I know from a child coming up, everyone looked at me and said, he, as an empath, I was able to feel, I guess you could say, the happiness that certain parts of my relative's house brought them. Like I had there was a house in the family since about the 1880s and stayed in the family until the last Franklin sold it in the 1980s. And that house had wainscoting, which is you see the actual wooden grain of the wood, and it's painted with either varnish or some type of oil applied to it, so it's very glossy. And as a child, I'd look at that and I'd laugh and giggle. It just brought me such happiness. And I think what I was feeling was my blood relatives on my mother's side, the joy that this wainscoting brought to them when they made them proud when they would show friends and family, look at my beautiful wainscoting. And if people don't know what wainscoting is, it's wood that comes up from the floor molding to about window level. And it has molding at the top. That way, if you have a wooden chair and you scoot the chair against the wall, it won't dent the wall. It'll just run into your top of your molding at the top of your wainscoting. So that always just brought me such joy. And especially my mother was so distraught about that she wouldn't allow me to go to that house anymore, which hurt my feelings because, as a 4-year-old, I like being happy. And I even had 4-year olds that knew of this because my mother told everybody. I had 4 years olds that would tell me, something's wrong with you. No 4-year old looks at wood and becomes happy. So I was I was pretty much a piranha up until I moved to Florida. I had a hard time getting anything but a minimum wage job. And just because of the way people think negatively about a certain person. Now, you could take me as a child and having the ability to be an empath and feel certain things from objects that other people felt that made them happy. I still go to an antique store today and be happy go lucky and never, I don't collect antiques. I don't buy antiques. Antique people get tired of me coming into their store and not buying anything. But I sure am happy while I'm in there. And I'm feeling all the joy that the antiques have brought the people that, you know, maybe in a person's lifetime, they could only afford one antique. And they sure were proud of that antique and they loved it. So I feel all that as empath. But a lot of people, when I was growing up in the early 60s, they wanted to look at that as if to say, well, he's got some type of problem. Back then, they used to call it retardation, mental retardation. And, you know, doctors were the same way. They didn't know any better. And my parents were like, oh my God, you know. So I was the bad guy, and I wasn't trying to be the bad guy. I was just being honest with my parents, which I learned at a young age. You can't be when they treat you the way they treat you. You can't be honest about your empathic abilities. Of course, I didn't know that term when I was 4 years old. So I look at vampires the same way that people looked at me in the 1960s and where I lived at in Maryland up until I moved to Florida in 1993. A lot of people looked at me as if, well, he's not all there. He's either crazy or he's, you know, mental retarded or whatever they want to call that today. And that was never the case. That just wasn't any situation like that. But that's how people can be molded and brainwashed into thinking another person is evil or bad. And I think the same thing happened to the vampire. And I just
Right.
like to say, if I was a if I was a cattle or a deer or an elk, I would rather the vampire drink a pint of my blood than to kill me and eat my meat. So anyway,
You know, that's a good point, and it actually made me think about something else that's going on, and it's a two-part theoretical question for you. And the first part is, do we feel like when the vampires first came here from where they came from, being, you know, they fed on blood, they realized humans, if they drink them too much and they disappear, people frown upon that. So they had to switch to animals to be, you know, able to keep themselves hidden and able to live among us without us targeting them. And then the second part of that question is, when we see like stories of like animals that are found mysteriously drained of blood and maybe missing an organ that's tied to the blood, could that be a vampire that was there and maybe went too far with their feeding, and that's why there's no blood in that animal and no blood on the ground because they drank them too much, you know, too many vampires fed on the animal at the same time.
well, your first theory about vampires. I mean, if I was a vampire and I was trying to live as just a human, you know, if you're out drinking the blood of human beings, probably someone's going to rat on you and tell, you know, or someone they're going to see the bites in your neck. So feeding on large cattle or horses, you know, they won't miss a pint of blood because they probably have 20 or 30 pints, I think, for a cattle or a horse. So I'm sure that vampires would rather feed on something and not give themselves away so they could just hide within, you know, the existence of being just another human being. And that would allow them to breed with the human beings. And I'm sure that has happened. So there might be a little bit of vampire in all of us. Now, when it comes to these cattle immunizations, I'm it's a possibility that the ones without any blood could have been something drained the blood to use it. But I think vampires probably aren't the problem because I think vampires, would just conveniently drink what they need and find another animal the next time they feed. I don't think vampires would need to just take all the blood from a animal and drain it. And a lot of these mutilations seem to be something as far as advanced surgical cuts that our medical science does not have the ability to do. So whoever's doing it is far above our ability and our technology than what we have here on Earth. So I think it would be a uh, a race of extraterrestrials who are doing it, and I think if anything, they're doing some type of experiments. They might be, doing some type of interbreed or some type of DNA manipulation. They have to understand about the cattle's system to be able to better manipulate the DNA to come up with a better cattle. So, can I rule out that it's not vampires? I can't rule out that it could be a vampire that's doing it, but I would think that vampires would not really have the need to do the scientific research or manipulate or change the DNA of the animal. So it looks like they're just trying to dissect the animal the way a medical school would dissect it, and they're just looking at certain organs, and they don't seem to care about the life of the animal. Now, if you're from a extraterrestrial race that has the ability to have a laser that can do such fine cuts and have a laser that's powerful enough and small enough that you can hold in your hand, why wouldn't you just take the animal and do some type of x-ray diffraction and keep it alive? Now, x-ray diffraction is a way of looking at different portions of a human body. Well, actually, it's done on X-ray diffraction as we know it today is done on metals and not on the human body. So I stand corrected on that. But we have nuclear medicine like CAT scans that can look at the full thickness of the brain and look at different levels of the thickness of the brain. Why wouldn't these extraterrestrials just not use some type of tool like that to study the cattle's system if they want to manipulate the DNA without having to kill it? So I don't understand that either. It's puzzling. I can't see the motivation of a extraterrestrial entity or a person that has a laser that can cut, the way their laser seems to cut through bone and skin and other tissue, but they don't just use some type of CAT scan to actually learn about the biological nature of the cow's system.
And
So,
then one last question I have, I'm curious your thoughts behind is we talk about, them coming from a world where it's white dwarf or blue dwarf where they can't interact with the sun. Could they have found by feeding on the blood of the animals who pretty much live under the sun, they found like an antidote that as they kept drinking it and reproducing if they had that ability, that all of a suddenly sunlight wasn't an issue? could that be a reason why they would also switch to feeding on the blood of the animals?
Well, I think that for vampires, their whole genetics was based on organism that was used to very light rays of their star. So the fact that their DNA will denature when they're exposed to a medium strength star like the sun on our planet, I don't think there's anything that could stop them from being denatured other than to crossbreed with, humans. So I don't think drinking the blood of animals would actually help. Um, I don't know the full extent of the biological system of vampires. So in the future, there might be a possibility that that could help, but I would say probably would not. I don't think that will help them to withstand the sunlight. I think they would have to actually genetically alter their offspring by breeding with humans.
Okay, and one last question we have is Kitzla Hell is asking, do you think this is where narcissists come from?
I don't think so. I think narcissism is it's a form of mental illness where people have enough smarts where they can manipulate others and can really cause a lot of hell for a lot of people. But I think vampires um, are just very intelligent and very have the ability to be very caring. So no, I don't think there's any connection.
Okay, and my full last question about vampires comes from the legends and the lore, and the fact that if they drink all of the blood of a human, they become a vampire, so to speak, or they're dead. Do you think that there's some truth to that, or do you think that's all stuff that's to keep us in fear from being around vampires?
Well, the way I have heard the legend to be, they don't have to drink all your blood, but if the vampire drinking your blood leads to your death, which you don't have to have all the blood drained from your body to go in shock and pass away. As an Army medic and a Maryland EMT, uh, you only have to lose enough of it to go into shock. So if a vampire isn't careful and they drink too much of your blood and you happen to die, to the best of my knowledge, you will return as a vampire. That's the way the legend goes. Do I have personal knowledge of this? No. Um, but that's the way I understand the legend. Now, every movie that comes out of Hollywood, they can manipulate that and change that a little bit. And then the last movie that came out, well, the people who are young people now, that's the way they're going to think of vampires. So
I was just curious with your research and background if you found anything that would say, no, this isn't actually possible, or, well, yeah, it is plausible. This could
I think
happen.
so. I think that if a vampire causes your death by drinking too much blood, then you will return as a vampire. But if the vampire bites you and you don't die, or you end up dying in the future of cancer or being hit by a car, then I don't think you will become a vampire. I think the vampire has to actually cause your death directly by drinking too much blood. And they don't have to drain all the blood out. You can go into shock just by losing. I'm trying to think. I think most people have 6, 7, 8 pints of blood. You can go into shock just losing 3 pints because it's just not enough blood to go to all the oxidated parts of your body, and you can go into shock. And if you're not treated for shock, you could die.
Yeah, and that's probably why at the blood bank they only limit you to 1 or 2 pints a day because they don't want you going into shock either.
Yeah,
But Kitsley Hell said, "Thank you for answering our question," and I
you're
am
welcome.
going to take the last few moments that we have and just let you promote your books again. And if you have anything upcoming you want to share, you're welcome to promote it as well.
All right. My book, The Hayes House Ghost or People 2, is only available as ebook on Kindle. It's no longer in paperback. Now, if there is some supplier that still has it, you know, I've already been paid all of the royalties that I'm going to get paid on that. But if somebody has it and it's in the system and you can find it, grab that book. In the future, I'm never going to go for a 340-page book again because I think people would rather enjoy a book that's much smaller in size. Um, as far as Vampires Dead or Alive, that is available paperback on Amazon and ebook on Kindle. I also have a YouTube channel. I do paranormal short sessions by Keith Evans. I usually try to communicate with good to neutral ghosts of spirits that are just hanging out and just show people how I go about communicating. And I try to analyze my communication as I go along. And I take at least 30 to a minute long promos that I put on Instagram and Facebook. And then I also put the whole promo on YouTube along with the paranormal short sessions that I do. Because sometimes if I'm doing a promo and I'm getting good data, I won't cut away. But Instagram or Facebook will only do about 1 minute of my promo and then they'll cut it. So if you're watching a promo of mine on Instagram or Facebook and it cuts away after 60 seconds, you can always go on my YouTube channel and see the promo in its entirety. So it's free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is called Paranormal Short Sessions by Keith Evans. And I'm hoping to work on some more books in the future. I have at least 2 or 3 that I'm thinking about and that I'm iffy like working on, but the one that rises fastest to being completed is published will be the one that I have enough information on that I feel satisfied to let it go out there so that the audience can read it. So I don't know which one that'll be yet.
Well, very cool. So, thank you, Keith, for coming on and sharing all of this with us. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone in the chat room and everyone who's watching. And
Thank you, everybody.
maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get Keith back on for another episode and hear more about his future adventures that are going to be coming down the pike, so to
That
speak.
would be good.
All right. Well, with that, I am going to say good night to everyone. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful night, day, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Fill it with love and joy. We need more of that in the world.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.